The Diary of Thoughts, Part 1. About creation. The present text doesn't obey to any grammatical structure, nor is it subject to any rule regarding its presentation to your eyes. All these lines are also subject to modifications at any moment, as my spirit brings new ideas every second of my life. There are no rules at all. It means that you are going to find lots of mistakes all along these simple dissertations, even stupid things. Be ready. Maybe this document represents my testament for society, as it expresses a certain testimony about my experience, so about certain knowledge that it is directly related to good and bad links, as it wasn't a perfect existence. It never is. Also, it's not the purpose of this document to pretend to write a masterpiece of philosophy or explain some self-sociologic principles. This intention would be a mere pretension of the writer. This book is a simple diary of thoughts based on self-experiences all along my life as any other human beings on this planet. If we think deeply, we'll find that all those millions and millions of thoughts also exist in the spirit of even illiterate. In their way, they try to express those thoughts, sometimes without success, others in the wrong way, or just keep them deep inside, as they make part of that continuous flow of creation. I could have also written this document based on the acquired knowledge from historical, scientific or other specialized books, but I didn't. All that I have read in my life, always insufficient, made a fundamental contribution to these words and thoughts. Books are a source of different expressions of knowledge and translate the spirit of those who can share their inner values and principles. I spontaneously wrote what came to mind, without forcing what is supposed to be forced. The thoughts just came out naturally, as usually happens with the word inspiration. The title Diary of Thoughts is based on a common habit of millions of people, which is to write about their daily experiences, but I think that this book doesn't obey exactly to that pattern or practice. At least I don't feel like I am writing a diary of my life, but instead, I am just trying to express the most inner thoughts and reflections that reign in my spirit. I also talk of my doubts, conclusions, fears, experiences, values, principles and contradictions, along with all the rest that we all just can't enumerate. The Diary of Thoughts implies also writing about my mistakes, my imperfections, along with my beliefs, convictions and so on. You can compare it in religious terms, as a confession before, not a priest, but before society, as I consider that we all, in a certain way, owe something to society as we make an intrinsic part of it. By the mere fact that I wrote this last paragraph, it already manifests a particular vision about society that I will try to express in later chapters of this document. I think that the most of this document are based on everything that is related to that vision, feeling, and belief that we are all the same without knowing it, or putting it in other words, knowing it but trying to ignore it. This document is also the final result of trying to put together all the pieces of this endless puzzle of thoughts that our spirits carry all the time. This statement means that you might find a non-synchronized relation between several thoughts as they might disperse themselves in writing as it happens in our spirits. Let's call it as they will present themselves in an orderly disorder. Briefly, don't try to find a chronological table of content because, with me, it's impossible. If you find some complicated words that will make you consult a dictionary, don't think that I do it on purpose because I'm very far from an intellectual. As a matter of fact, I believe that the word intellectual is like a label established by society to define those who were able to cultivate themselves, but there is another kind of intellectual that lives inside uneducated people. When I started to write these thoughts, I was influenced in an uncontrolled manner by the writing one of my late wife's favorite writers, namely Leo Buscaglia, Felice Leonardo Leo Buscaglia, Ph.D., at the University of California. This writer and teacher had the gift to explain everything with simple and humble words to reach everyone. This humility brings the exact and correct way to communicate with all other people without causing any barrier. The first book my beloved late wife bought from Leo was Bus 9 to Paradise, an example of simplicity, humbleness, and mostly pure feelings from a person that wouldn't be able to write it the way he did, if he didn't feel it that way. God bless you, Leo. Sometimes, even that humble and simple intellectuality teaches and serves as a complement of knowledge for those officially considered or labeled with that same title. You might think that this is a contradiction, but it isn't. It's simply the balance that is naturally created around us. I call it the invisible balance. We'll talk about it later on in this document. As you can verify, The orderly disorderly process has just begun since I am already mixing my thoughts. You see? I told you it would be so. Due to that same fact, at this precise moment, I thought about making a blog out of this document that will replace the conventional chapters that we are used to seeing in every single book. Instead of chapters, let's call it Diary of Thoughts Part 1 and so on. It's not that it replaces the concept of creating a precise method of writing, but it might be different in a sense that, as obeying to that principle, these parts will translate my thoughts in a random order. Contradictory it might seem, it brings me a certain feeling in the sense that it can be different this way, and it gives me the necessary motivation to write. Funny. It's incredible what can happen to us regarding thoughts. You might believe, or even think that I am writing these words with a planned purpose, but I don't. I'm not in any way trying to create an ambience of suspense or to create for you the necessary motivation to follow the content of these pages. If it happens, it will be even nicer than it was supposed to be. This idea came along, spontaneously, brought by creation itself, if you can call it it. As creation doesn't have any sex, it is difficult for us to define the right gender category of this invisible entity that we all know exists, but we fear to accept. I only assume that creation played the same role as our mother, so I connect this fact to the feminine sex as it happened with our physical origin. You see, as I am writing, I have already changed the subject, but still respect a particular line of thoughts. In the end, it's like a conversation around a table or in a pub at the end of a day's work. I don't know if you noticed, but in certain occasions, while drinking with friends and people we meet, we start talking about subjects that we ignored that we would not otherwise discuss, but we do. It doesn't matter if it's because we are uninhibited due to drinking. This eventual condition is not important to me. If drinking brings us an open mind and free spirit that allows us to liberate our minds, our hidden potentials and faculties, just do it without hesitation, always controlling your tendency for excesses. It happens with everybody. It's not a crime. If we take a look around, everything that implies creation involves a particular kind of liberation of the spirit, as we are not conditioned to conventional values about what we can do or not do. The so-called moral component created by society is necessary, as we all need to have some method and logic in our lives. However, it's not fundamental and can become an eventual handicap in some contexts, like those related to art or another form of creation. A spectacular movie that translates in a very accurate way the role, even the importance of some non-inhibition products like alcohol or other related stuff in the creativity of an artist, is Mickey Rourke and Faye Dunaway's Barfly. Like I just wrote, and it's going to be another subject that I am sure I am going to talk about a lot, logic is a fundamental component of life along with energy. As a matter of fact, I am convinced that life is nothing but energy and logic. I even think three different elements makes us exist along with the immense cosmos that we find out there, and I even recently posted on my status on Facebook the following thought. Life is made of three different elements: the energy that makes all move and exist, the logic that implies intelligence and feelings which represent love and harmony. The first one, energy, is related to the universe, as energy it is. The second, logic, is the ultimate goal of the creator. The third element, feelings, is common to the first two dimensions and the key that neutralizes the confrontation between those two ones. It's true that creation imposes rules to maintain that invisible balance that exists. By this fact, sometimes we feel like machines or mere robots instead of human beings. In fact, that is nothing but an imposed method that creation found necessary to establish as a regulator of our behavior. This condition also implies the consolidation of a system in its foundations. It doesn't mean, however, that we are supposed to become slaves of that same system, as creation also gave us the possibility to think and evolve. An example of applying a method and sequence to what I am writing now, it was like I was supposed to say to you, at the end of these lines, Part 1, that this text was written on the 4th of September 2010 at 1 p.m. or whatever. I can do it just to facilitate the arithmetical identification of several subjects. Without calling it chapters or parts, I can only identify them by just giving a title to each topic that I am developing in each paragraph. But as they don't obey to any conventional structural writing method, this might cause a lot of confusion. So let's keep the arithmetical formula as a solution. We can even imagine a contest that is living inside this document between all the different subjects that are mentioned. This book would become a kind of creation of a virtual game on a computer to know what subject would win in the end. Don't you think it is a funny or interesting idea? It's always necessary to apply a method. But it doesn't become more important if I do, as these thoughts are identified in their time and space. In fact, time doesn't exist. Time is a notion that we created to regulate our procedures. The concept of time we have doesn't match the universal time, which after all is not called time at all, but merely a never-ending motion of the creation. I believe that the moment that man created time, he started counting his time of existence, contrary to other living species that just live every day of their lives without posing that kind of question. The lack of belief about the continuity of our lives in another extension, another dimension, causes all the distortion related to human behaviors, namely the lack of respect for the life of others, even for our lives. We can say that we all are lost in our time. This same notion, and depending on its interpretation, creates several contexts in society, sometimes positive, others very negative. I am persuaded that the factor time acts in the minds and spirit of some people as the cause of certain excesses. Those excesses are manifested by, for instance, abuse of power, corruption, criminality and other related behaviors. Speaking about science fiction, I find extremely funny when some people think that they could hibernate, staying in a complete state of lethargy while frozen and living during centuries. In fact, their real individual period of existence would always be translated by the same time. Hibernating would be like in a long deep sleep where time just doesn't exist. This conclusion means that there is the conscious time and the hidden time that makes the difference between being awake and asleep. They only could say that they exist for 2 centuries or more, but they would never change their time of conscious living. The notion that we are going to end in a certain unpredictable moment leads some people to think and mostly act as, nothing matters if I do right or wrong, as we all going to die. This reaction is the result of the doubt that resides in all of us about what's coming next. Is there an end or not? Was I born just to be here and be submitted to everything that my eyes can capture, or there is a purpose for my existence? These are called existential questions, which are common to every single human being. Surely there is a purpose. There is a purpose for everything. Maybe the purpose for the doubt is to create in us a challenge within ourselves to obtain a conclusion about our beliefs and convictions. Maybe it is a kind of selection that the creation adopted to proceed to the next step. Of course, it would be too illogical, even for the creation herself, and it would be too cruel from her to impose on us a beginning and an end, starting by giving we as human beings that kind of awareness about our existence. Don't you think so? At this time, I suppose you are calling me some names like philosopher or crazy, or naive, whatever. Even if I match one of those labels, I still think there are no limits for our thoughts, as they represent a crucial thing in our lives and that nobody can take away from us. The society established the name philosophy to everything that cannot be proven, or something that they cannot understand, or are afraid to comprehend. If we look at history and all the examples related to famous creators, we'll see that their so-called philosophy was in most cases recognized as a legitimate fact that would be proved later on, after their death. But in reality, history repeats. It's like a mirror against a mirror lost in space, where we can eternally see ourselves through different images and contexts. We can believe that we are present in every single mirror, or merely believe that our mirror will fall into small pieces and be finally lost in space. So at this point, in being coherent with what I said some lines ago, I don't care what time it is. I am writing in my time, or if you want, in our time. Our time, as we all make part of it. Science fiction always tried to use time travel to prove that the notion we have about time doesn't exist, as there will be a way to handle it, locate it and use it at the level that will eventually allow us to change future events. That's one of the examples that showed that every second of our lives are interconnected, and the future is nothing but the reflections of past time. The movie Minority Report with Tom Cruise show us how everything would be different if we could anticipate time, read it and finally be able to change it. As a fanatic about music, as it is part of my life, I read one day some interesting lyrics of a musician. It is an old vinyl recording that expressed some fundamental principles about our existence. It only expressed that, quote, "Some people are fighting against time, others have time to live." I think it translates the message that I was trying to write to you. Later on in this whole document we'll make an interesting analysis of this poem. The Diary of Thoughts. End of Part 1.